In the wake of recent news stories about UFOs and UAPs, several podcasts and channels that I follow were dipping their toes into the debate over aliens, whether they exist, whether we've been visited by them, and so on. I'm basically agnostic about the subject, so I was interested. The first long-form podcast that I heard on the subject was on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which had posted a conversation between Jimmy, Cameron Bertuzzi, and Tyler McNabb, which had originally happened over on Capturing Christianity. And it was a great conversation. Jimmy Akin, who's our guest today, was extremely knowledgeable. In his contributions, he was cautious, thorough, he anticipated a lot of objections and steelmanned them, and it was overall a really great conversation. Then, I started listening to some other podcasts and YouTube channels that were also covering the same stories, and I realized that the bar had been set a little bit high. The same degree of quality was not met on these other shows. Frustratingly, I heard the same objections trotted out over and over again, as if UFO believers had never heard them and had no response at all to them. So I thought we could hopefully improve the quality of the discourse by helping to advance it past those initial thoughts that are pretty commonly offered. So we'll be addressing 10 very common objections, talking points, etc. that are offered by skeptics. And hopefully they will take this into account going forward and become better skeptics, actually understanding the position they're criticizing, and helping to move the conversation into more interesting territory, instead of holding it back and just spinning their wheels and never getting past those first stages. So that's why we're here today. I'm joined by Jimmy Akin, Senior Apologist for Catholic Answers and co-host of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Emerson. Great to be here.
I am a fan of Mysterious World, so would you mind explaining the show a bit for people who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, sure. So it's a weekly podcast that I do. It comes out at least every Friday, and we sometimes have bonus episodes that appear at other points in the week. Every Friday, we look at a mysterious topic, and the mysteries are all over the map in terms of the kinds of mysteries they are. Sometimes it's a purely natural mystery, like a scientific mystery or a historical mystery. We even sometimes do a little bit of true crime. It could be a paranormal mystery, including, cryptids or UFOs. It could involve psychic functioning. It could involve a religious mystery. As long as it's mysterious, I'm happy to look at it. And what we do is we present the background on the mystery, and then we try to analyze it. One of the things a lot of mystery-oriented shows do is they don't really try to solve the mysteries. Instead, what they do is they just want to generate wonder and imagine, what if this were true, and things like that. And that's not my approach. What we try to do is solve them to the extent they can be solved. Sometimes we're able to eliminate some possibilities. What we do is after we present the background to the mystery, we make a list of possibilities of what could explain this. And we start with natural, non-exotic explanations. And then we go through the list and see what can we eliminate, what is not a good explanation for it. Or even if a given explanation will explain some of the cases we're talking about, it may not be a good explanation for all of them. And so we proceed through the list. We use the twin perspectives of faith and reason. Typically, we start with the reason perspective, and we say, what would reason tell us about this? And we try to solve it as much as we can. Sometimes we get down to there's really only one solution to this. Sometimes there are a few that are left on the table. And then we'll say, okay, so what would the Christian faith have to say about this? And specifically, since I'm a Catholic, what would the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith have to say about it? And so we include that, but we're not looking at things simply from a doctrinal point of view. We keep the faith and reason segments separate, at least typically. If it's a religious mystery, it's a little harder to do that. But we try to keep our disciplines separate and look at it from both perspectives in a pretty rigorous way. One of the things that we do is just because, well, for example, sometimes as I'm researching and writing about a subject, arguments will occur to me, and sometimes they are arguments that I haven't seen in the literature. So these are arguments that I could actually claim credit for. But I don't spare them. And I've had people write in and say, this is what I love so much about this show. Here's my argument. Now here's 5 reasons why I'm wrong. And so I try to be scrupulously fair and open-minded, but also use critical thinking in approaching the mysteries we do.
Yeah, well, if you haven't checked out the show already, then you definitely should. So let's go into these 10 objections.
Sure.
The first one has been popular for the last 6 or 7 years or so. This is called the President Trump Objection. If the government knew of alien visitations, Trump would have learned about it. If Trump knew about it, he wouldn't have been able to keep his mouth shut about it. But Trump never said anything about UFOs or aliens. Therefore, the government doesn't have knowledge of alien visitations.
Okay, so I appreciate the humor of this objection, and there are a few things that I would say about it. The first one is it's actually not true that he said nothing about UFOs or UAPs, as they're often called these days. He was asked about it after the 2017 New York Times article came out, talking about the Defense Department's ATIP program that had been set up to investigate such claims. He was asked in interviews about it, and he was not particularly supportive of the claims, of the interpretation, I should say, of the claims that were being visited by extraterrestrials. He said he didn't really think a lot about it. He did try to be supportive, though, of the pilots. He didn't want to dismiss the pilots or belittle the pilots, but he did not come across as an alien believer. So even though he has said some stuff on this topic, it's not true that he said nothing. He didn't endorse the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So let's back up in the argument. Is it true that if the government knew about him, knew that we were being visited by extraterrestrials, that Trump would have known about it? No, that's a false premise. For 2 reasons. One, there have been government programs on this, like ATIP, but the government is a bureaucracy, in case you haven't noticed. And one of the things about bureaucracies, especially the classified parts of them, tend not to talk to each other. They tend not to be very communicative. And so I could see how just because of bureaucratic secretiveness, any such knowledge of extraterrestrials could be very tightly held and not communicated to President Trump. There also, and this is a claim that UFO believers will say, and I probably should clarify, I'm not a UFO believer. I think it is probable that I think it's very probable that life exists elsewhere in the universe, and I think it's probable that intelligent life exists elsewhere. I'm open to the idea that we may be visited by extraterrestrials, but I have yet to find a case that I think proves that. So I'm open on the UAP UFO phenomena, but in terms of could these be extraterrestrials, but I'm not convinced of that. However, people who are convinced of that have an explanation which I think is quite plausible, precisely because presidents come and go, and not all presidents are to everyone's liking, and some presidents can even be unstable. The claim is that not all presidents are brought into the circle on this, that sometimes knowledge is deliberately withheld from U.S. presidents so that they can't spill the beans unnecessarily. And I could easily imagine, and we do know that people in the government sometimes withhold information from the president so that, for example, he can have plausible deniability. Well, this would just be another application of that. And I can easily imagine people in the background, in the classified world, saying, okay, we got this Donald Trump guy. He's a little flamboyant. He's a reality TV show star. Do we want to let this guy know about the aliens, or is he going to say something that's going to make our lives a whole lot worse? Well, maybe we want to just keep this close to the vest and not tell Donald Trump about it.
Yeah, I mean, one phrase that I hear mentioned when this objection is brought up is temporary employees, which is how some, view elected officials. And just, on elected officials being, considered temporary employees, I don't want to say that there are permanent employees, but there are less impermanent figures who
are career employees.
Much less impermanent figures. And there are, shady characters, but they don't have to be. Like they're not all like Alan Dulles or, J. Edgar Hoover, who served under, who served in different intelligence agencies under, many different administrations. And both were involved in activities that the executive branch didn't know about. There are also not so shady people who are, less impermanent career figures.
There's a great British sitcom, if you ever want to check it out, called Yes Minister. And eventually it becomes Yes Prime Minister, but it's about a gentleman who is a Minister of Parliament. Initially, he later becomes Prime Minister, but he's a Minister of Parliament, and he is supported by his aides, who are all career employees. And there's a very clear distinction between that illustrates exactly what you're talking about. But on the show, the comedy comes from the fact that the minister is trying to bring about change and do things and implement new policies. And the bureaucrats, who are the career employees that surround him, are systematically thwarting what he wants to do and reining him in and trying, well, minister, we certainly could do that, but this would be the consequence. And it's all about the difference between the permanent career employees and their interests versus the minister who's trying to represent his own views and what he perceives as the people's best interests. It kind of goes along with Jerry Pournelle's iron law of bureaucracy, which is that any bureaucracy will eventually come to serve the interests of the bureaucrats and not the people who it's meant to serve. And so in a government context, you would think, they're the government officials, they're our representatives. They're there to serve our interests. Yeah, but they're also sitting on top of a bureaucracy that's going to serve its own interests.
Well, that sounds like a great show. But, and I've also heard about just different people in Congress who have like the same aides and the same staff from like previous people who were like, they didn't win their elections. It's just like, there are just these more permanent figures. Some of them are kind of sinister, like Alan Dulles or Hoover, and some of them are, more like the more comic figures. And then, people in between, maybe like, like Nick Pope, someone who talks about UFOs. He was in the UK Ministry of Defense, I think, for like over 20 years.
Yep. And he manned the UFO desk for a number of years.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to also mention presidents in the United States government are uniquely temporary, because if you're a president, you get a 4-year term and maybe you get a second 4-year term. But that's it. After that, you're out of office, because presidents, unlike members of Congress and senators, are term limited. So they're especially temporary employees.
Okay, so the President Trump objection, not quite as devastating as some people seem to think it is. But this next one, the too many people objection, this is like another very common one. There would have to be too many people involved in a cover-up of alien visitations, so someone would accidentally let it slip or blow the whistle eventually. And to quote Bill Nye, the government kind of sucks at keeping secrets.
Well, with all due deference to Bill Nye, the science comedian, the government does sometimes suck at keeping secrets, but not all the time. So I guess I'd have 3 responses here. The first one is there actually are a lot of classified programs that we never hear about. And there are, weapon systems and other things that are in research that, people actually do keep their security oaths. And the more important they perceive their security oath to be, the more likely they are to keep it. And there have been numerous people who have, said, I know stuff, but I just can't talk about it because of my security. My security oath prevents me from doing that. I swore this oath. I take it seriously. And as a result, there's lots of stuff we just don't know about. What we do know is how much money is being spent in general terms, and it is a vast amount of money on dark projects. And if you say, okay, so what's responsible? What are they spending it on? We don't know. And that means that a lot of dark projects are genuinely dark. We just don't know what's happening. So I think that Bill Nye is underestimating the ability of many in the government to keep things secret. Secondly, I don't think you need that many people to be involved in such a program. If we had a massive UFO research program, then yeah, sure, you'd need a large number of people involved, and the odds are that some of them would spill the beans. But I don't know that that's what we have. When ATIP became public, it turns out they were running that on a shoestring. And there were a small number of people involved in that. And if that's true of other classified UFO-related programs, and there actually may not be that many people involved. The third response, and this is one you'll get from a lot of UFO believers, is people have been spilling the beans. Duh. David Grush is not the first. Read the UFO literature. There have been former government and military officials saying this for decades. So actually they would say there have been a lot of bean spillers. And so the objection that if there would be too many people involved, someone would spill the beans. Lots of somebodies have been spilling the beans.
Yeah, that's a good point. But like there are some things though that have been declassified because they aren't really sensitive anymore, and it turns out that secrets have been kept involving hundreds, sometimes thousands of people for decades. So I mean, like when people say this kind of thing, like, oh, too many, there would be an Edward Snowden, there would have to be some leak or like some mistake or something. It's like, I don't know where it's like, do they just not know about some of these things or what? Because it just seems like impossible to maintain when you look at the fact that governments have kept secrets successfully, involving lots and lots of people, sometimes very sensitive ones for many decades.
Now, you mentioned that things get declassified when they're no longer important. Well, that's true. They frequently do. They don't get declassified as quickly or as fully as they should because secrecy breeds secrecy, and so the government keeps things secret just because it can. But guess what? The UFO issue is still relevant. It's not something that's obsolete now. I mean, let's suppose we make contact with aliens and they turn out to be our best buds and we join a galactic federation. Well, at that point, they might declassify our early contact files. But as long as we're not best buds with the aliens, or as long as the aliens say, please keep us on the down low, they're not going to declassify that stuff. And so it's still going to be classified. It's not like, 19th century technology that we can declassify the secret U.S. dirigible program because we have things much better than dirigibles now. We don't got UFOs. We don't have things much better than UFOs right now. So the UFO tech is still going to be classified if we have it.
Yeah. And, there would still be some resistance to declassifying things if there was anything in those files that made the government look bad. Like, especially in a time when people are like more cynical and more distrustful, like they keep delaying, the release of certain documents pertaining to JFK, and they keep citing national security, and people laugh at it every time because how could it possibly involve national security at this point? And it seems like everyone who I've heard talk about this, even if they're not like a JFK conspiracy theorist, they're still just like, well, they probably just don't want to declassify it because the CIA was up to all kinds of things that they wouldn't want people to know about because it makes them look horrible. Even if it wasn't like, oh yeah, it turns out they killed JFK, even if it has nothing to do with that, they probably still don't want it declassified because it might make them look bad.
Yeah, it took a long time, for example, to get confirmation of some of Lee Harvey Oswald's ties with the FBI because they learned really quickly, oh wait, this guy is on our books. at the FBI. He had, like, among other things, one of the things that is known about his connection is he had sent an angry letter to the FBI. This is one of the few things that did survive. He had sent an angry letter to the FBI saying, "Stop harassing my wife, Marina." And they uncovered that fact really quickly after the assassination, and they tried to cover up that he had any connection with them, but eventually it came out. In terms of making the government look bad, now, this is not my belief, but I'm going to tell you what a lot of UFO people have said. And this is not necessarily a majority in the UFO community, a majority opinion in the UFO community, but one of the claims is that the United States has a treaty with extraterrestrial intelligences, and one of the terms of that treaty is, in exchange for technology, we allow them to kidnap and abduct a certain number of human beings. How would that go down if that came out? Would the American public be okay with President Eisenhower or someone agreeing to let aliens abduct human beings and run traumatic experiments on them? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing no. That would be put in the same category as, for example, the Tuskegee Airmen, where, various other nasty government experiments on people that were done without informed consent. And if we were letting the aliens do nasty experiments on us without informed consent, that would be viewed very negatively as a government action. That's exactly the kind of thing the government would not want to fess up to.
Right. So, one more thing I wanted to say about the too many people objection before we move on. Mm-hmm. I know that skeptics primarily reason by way of logical fallacies, so I have a logical fallacy here to help them understand this point. And we can call it the wig fallacy, or the AI image fallacy. So the fallacy is basically, I can always tell when someone is wearing a wig. It's like, well, maybe you can you notice when people are wearing a bad wig, but kind of by definition, you can't notice someone who's wearing a really good wig, or the same with AI generated images. I can always tell when an image is AI generated. Well, I mean, maybe it's obvious sometimes, but maybe there are really good ones and you can't tell. So saying like, oh, the government is bad at keeping secrets. Well,
except all the times it's good at it, and you don't have that data.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you cite times where they didn't keep the secret because you can only cite the times when they didn't keep the secrets, and you have no idea what the overall set is. But yeah, so I think that's a helpful illustration, the AI image fallacy or the wig fallacy.
Yep.
So moving along to the Crash Objection. This is another favorite one.
Okay.
So, these super advanced aliens can build technology that to us is nearly indistinguishable from magic. They can travel all the way here with that technology, and then when they get here, they crash into the surface of the Earth. But aliens this advanced just wouldn't crash their ships like that.
Mm-hmm. So I think there are a number of things that can be said in response to this one. Now, I think this one has some degree of plausibility. One of the things that I find difficult to credit in the current UFO whistleblower David Grush's testimony is the claim that we have material from 12 different extraterrestrial craft that were either crashed or abandoned, and that's I don't easily credit that, and partly it's for this reason. If they have advanced technology, then why would we have so many crashes that we can get 12 from presumably mostly our own territory, since we don't have access to what crashes in Russia or China? So I think this one has I think it has some credibility as an objection. At the same time, if I say, well, how would I respond if I was convinced that we did have such material? Well, okay. Or if I was convinced that UFOs are coming here, I guess the first thing I would say is, okay, so all the crash reports are wrong. That doesn't mean aliens aren't coming here. It just means these reports are wrong and we don't really have any material from them. Another thing that I would say, if I thought we did have material from them, is, okay, well, number one, we're not talking about these little ships that are flying around in our atmosphere, those aren't interstellar vessels. Those are local vessels. Those are for atmospheric and low Earth orbit use. The things that go between the stars are going to be big honking motherships, and these are just the little local use craft. It's like if you have, it's basically the aircraft carrier model. If we're going to cross the sea to fight a war with Japan, we're going to send aircraft carriers, but we're not going to attack Japan with the aircraft carrier. We're going to attack it with the fighter planes that the aircraft carrier is carrying. Right. And the fighter planes are more nimble than the aircraft carrier, but they're also more fragile than the aircraft carrier. And in the same way, if you've got a big honking mothership that you're going to send between stars, yeah, sure, it's going to need to be big, it's going to need to be tough, it's going to need to have lots of energy and fuel and all kinds of things like that. But that's not what you're going to fly around in to do your research on Earth. I mean, even Jacques Cousteau, when he would send the Calypso somewhere, they would send a diving bell down or something. And so as a result, you're going to have these little bitty local use craft that aren't designed to cross interstellar distances, and they're going to be fragile. And so, compared to the mothership, at least, and so that's one factor that needs to be taken into consideration here. Another factor is they may not be designed to handle the environment that they're going to be in, because we have electronic communication systems here and radar and other things that could mess with their systems. You know, it's like if you've ever been on an aircraft, they used to do this anyway. I don't know if they still do. They probably do in some circumstances, but you've got an unshielded Walkman to entertain yourself, and they'll come back and tell you, I'm sorry, your Walkman is interfering with our navigational system up in the cockpit, turn it off. And I've had that happen to me back in the early 2000s. And now we may have devices that are better shielded now that won't interfere with the aircraft's navigation equipment, but we primitive humans may be using the bad unshielded devices that mess with alien control systems. And that could be why the local fragile craft have crashed, because our systems are messing with them. Another possibility is their psychology is different than ours. We care as humans enormously about passenger safety. We're constantly doing, what can we do to improve passenger safety? And our aircraft today are vastly safer than they were even back in the 1970s. So maybe aliens just aren't like that. Maybe aliens don't care about passenger safety, and so they don't design for safety. And maybe what the local UFOs are carrying aren't even passengers. Maybe they're robots. Maybe these things are drones. And maybe a UFO is just a drone and it doesn't have anybody on it, and consequently it's not designed for safety because it's not carrying anybody. And therefore, if it's not designed for safety, and even the grays. I mean, Grush said we've got a biological material. He's been told we have biological material from one of these crashes. Well, maybe we do, and maybe it had a pilot, and maybe the pilot was a biological robot that nobody cared about. I mean, we're starting to build biological robots now. They're called xenobots, and we make them out of cells that we stitch together to do what we want. Well, maybe that's all grays are. They're just biological robots, or some other kind of robot that aren't considered the subject of human rights, or whatever the alien equivalent of human rights is. They're not viewed as valuable. They're just biological machines that are being used, and you don't care whether they live or die. So you don't, and you've got a bazillion of them. You can manufacture them. So you don't design for safety. Another possibility that I've heard proposed is maybe this is their way of helping us advance without overly disrupting our culture. Because one of the things we've learned from our own experience is when you have here on Earth a technologically advanced culture meet a primitive one, it doesn't go so well for the primitive culture. The technologically advanced culture, even without wanting to, is likely to overwhelm the primitive one. And so if the aliens have some kind of equivalent of the prime directive, they might want to help us along and help us eventually get to their level in a non-disruptive way where we're not just overwhelmed. Well, how might you do that? Well, if you want to give humans help to get up to their level, but without disrupting human culture, you might want to do it in a kind of, you definitely would want to do it in a kind of secretive way on the down low. You don't want to trumpet, hey, we're here to help you. Here are the blueprints for advanced technology, because that's going to disrupt. And that's what you're trying to avoid. So what might you do? Well, you might let humans get hold of little bits of alien tech so they can reverse engineer it and figure it out for themselves in a more organic way. It's going to take them time. It's going to take decades, in fact, maybe even longer, depending on the tech they're letting us see. And so you might want to lose a few alien artifacts on Earth to the humans, or let some of your technology crash so there's an innocent explanation that humans understand, because we understand crashing airplanes. They can see us crash airplanes. So it's like, oh, what if we did that? Well, then the humans would get some of our tech, not our best stuff, of course, but something better than what they've got. And then they could take a few decades and try to figure it out and slowly absorb the knowledge of it and us, and it'll be much less disruptive than if we just came down and gave them blueprints. So I've seen that proposed as well. This may be a form of alien technology transfer that's designed to be non-disruptive and on the down low.
Yeah. I mean, there are multiple ways to undercut this kind of objection. Mm-hmm. I think that one difference between you and me is I think I might think this objection is not as good even on its own terms, I guess. Like, it's worth noting that the people who build these things are probably not the same ones who fly them. Like, it's much easier to get trained to operate some machinery than it is to build the machinery. And, which, at least in our case, building technology is a group endeavor that takes many generations. So you could see how, like, over time, this really advanced technology would accumulate, even in, human civilization. And then people who operate the technology might screw it up sometimes. And it's like, you have really advanced technology with imperfect operators. Like this is a, kind of standard response that I guess you don't think is as convincing as I do. But, like, we can imagine humans crashing advanced vehicles thousands of years into the future. So.
I can't build a car, but I sure can crash one.
Yeah, exactly. And like an isolated tribe who saw us and was like, wow, look at all this crazy technology. And then we crash into a ditch or something because we're in, unfamiliar terrain. Like you were saying, if they're flying around, there's all these weird signals in the air from our primitive technology. But it's like, we're driving around not on roads and we crash somewhere in the Amazon. They're like, okay, so they can build this Range Rover, but then they just crash it in the ditch. It's like, yep, we could.
In fact, you can even think about storm chasers, who are driving around in vehicles that they probably don't know how to build, certainly not from the ground up. They're not car designers. But they're going out doing dangerous stuff, and they may get into accidents when they're chasing storms.
Yeah, so should we move on to the distance objection?
Sure.
So alien visitations would require traversing vast regions of space faster than the speed of light, since traveling the necessary distances without faster than light travel would require a prohibitively long time. But faster than light travel is impossible. So therefore, we're not being visited by aliens.
So I was just writing a script. For Mysterious World, it's fully scripted as a show, and I was just writing a script that I think is the longest script I've ever written for an episode and I believe this is going to come out in October, but it's responding to a claim you sometimes hear in the Christian community that aliens and UFOs, it's all just demons. I hear various people, now this is not the majority of you in the Christian community, but some people will say this, and you'll see them online in comment boxes saying, oh, aliens are just demons. Well, okay. How do you know that? What's your argument? And I was finally able to find someone who was actually putting forth arguments in a sustained way to try to make that case. He is a book called Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men by Hugh Ross, who is an evangelical astronomer, and Ken Samples, who's an evangelical apologist. And they have this book where they argue this in a sustained way. And so in my episode, I use that as like, great, I finally found a source of arguments I can interact with. And so I go through it and interact with their arguments. I conclude that their arguments, despite the fact these guys are on the side of the angels, I conclude their arguments are quite poor. But they make this exact argument. They say extraterrestrials cannot be visiting us because faster than light travel is impossible and slower than light travel is impractical. Okay. Is faster than light travel impossible? Not according to a lot of scientists. What Einstein's equations say is you cannot accelerate an object with mass up to the speed of light because it would require infinite energy. But that doesn't mean there aren't loopholes that you could use to do this, to travel faster than light in relative terms. I mean, one loophole, if it's possible to jump to an area where the laws of physics are different, what you might call a parallel universe, if it's possible to do that, well, then that universe might allow faster than light travel. Or it might, even though you have mass, or it might not map on to our universe in the same way. So you go 5 miles in the alternate universe, and and when you jump back, you've gone 5 light years. That's actually how the faster than light travel on the TV show Babylon 5 works. And there are a bunch of other loopholes too. One of the loopholes is based on the fact that even though objects with mass can't accelerate to the speed of light, there's no rule about space itself. In fact, the space is expanding in such a way that we have, because of the Lemaitre-Hubble constant, where space expands at a certain rate per kiloparsec of space, the universe is big enough that there actually are parts of it that are accelerating. They're moving away from us now faster than the speed of light. The objects themselves are not moving relative to each other. There'll just be a galaxy out there, and the galaxy is gravitationally bound to itself, and it perceives itself as in an expanding universe. But when you look at the distance between us and it, if space expands at, let's say, 70 kilometers per kiloparsec, there are so many kiloparsecs between us and it that effectively we're moving away from each other faster than the speed of light. And every year, as a result, stars fall over what's called the cosmic horizon because they're moving away from us so fast that now light can never get back to us from them. And every year, more and more stars fall over the cosmic horizon because of precisely this effect. So there actually is something happening in the universe where you have objects moving faster than the speed of light relative to each other. The question would be then, can you find a way to use this effect to give you practical faster than light travel? Well, back in the 1990s, just as Star Trek The Next Generation was ending, Mexican physicist and Star Trek fan Miguel Alcubierre started thinking about warp drive. It's like, how could warp drive? It involves warping space. Is there a way consistent with Einstein's general theory of relativity that would allow us to do that, to warp space in such a way that we can effectively go faster than the speed of light? And he concluded, yes. And he designed what's now known as the Alcubierre warp drive. What it does is it shrinks space, because space is malleable. It's bendable, for example, by gravitational fields and by acceleration and so forth. That's all general relativity. Well, what if you've got a ship and the ship is sitting still? Okay, it's in this patch of space. Ship is just sitting still in the middle of this patch of space. But it's got a warp drive. And so it reaches out its warp drive in front of the ship and shrinks the space in front of it, and then counterbalances that by expanding the space behind it. So it's doing two warp effects. It's shrinking in front and expanding behind. What that's going to have the effect of doing in relative terms is going to take the patch of space the ship is sitting in and accelerate it towards its destination. And it can do that faster than light, because there's no limit on how fast space can or cannot expand. And so, not that we know about anyway. And so he's designed a warp drive, and other physicists have looked at this and say, yeah, it doesn't violate any of the laws of physics. Now and his is not the only such design. Now there are problems that remain to be solved, and some of them actually have been solved. So we don't yet have a faster than light drive. It would be cool if we did, but we don't. But this has gotten a lot more respect in the last few decades from actual physicists than when a lot of people's opinions were kind of formed. And so you have a lot of physicists today saying, this probably can be done, or at least we should take it seriously that faster than light could be done. In his book, The Physics of the Impossible, physicist Michio Kaku, who's quite well known, has a whole chapter on how we could possibly go faster than light. Sabine Hossenfelder, a German theoretical physicist, says she thinks both communication and faster than light is possible, and that's probably why aliens haven't contacted us, because we haven't figured out how to do it. We're boring. It's kind of like the Vulcans didn't want to contact us until we figured out warp drive in Star Trek First Contact. So the first problem with the distance objection is actually this may be possible after all. We've got theories that would allow it, and they're working on trying to solve the practical problems. What about slower than light travel? So Hugh Ross's argument was it's impractical. And his argument was based on a couple of premises. One of them was that aliens wouldn't be up for doing generational ships. And you couldn't get up to the fraction of the speed of light you would need to have serious time dilation to traverse between stars in a single lifetime. You couldn't get up to that fraction of the speed of light given the fuel costs and so forth, how much fuel you'd have to bring and how much it would weigh and stuff like that. Okay, so multiple problems here. First one, he's depending on human psychology. He's assuming humans wouldn't be up for a multi-generation mission. Well, even if he's right about that, who says aliens think anything like us? Right. They might be totally fine with a multi-generation mission. They may be extreme ideologues, and their ancestors who set us on this mission, by gum, we're going to fulfill that mission and scope out that planet they spotted by telescopes. Even if it takes generations to do it, they may be up for that. Another problem, who says aliens have lifespans that are like ours? Right. Yeah. Maybe they naturally live for thousands of years, or maybe they've cracked the problem of aging, which we're working on now, and live for dramatically longer times. I was reading a story, I believe I saw it on Real Clear Science, which is one of the science aggregators that I check regularly, where one gerontologist was speculating that once we crack the problem of aging with regenerative DNA technology and so forth, we'll be able to live for up to 20,000 years. Well, okay. Could you get between star systems in 20,000 years if you're going an appreciable fraction of the speed of light? Sure you could. So they just may not perceive time the way we do. They may not have limited little lifespans that they feel they've got to race through. They may have thousands of year lifespans. They may be functionally immortal and perfectly happy taking their time to do stuff. Yet another problem. Why do you got to be awake through the whole thing? Right. What if you hibernate? We have creatures that hibernate here on Earth, like bears, for example. We're working on human hibernation right now. So even if you can't get between stars in a human lifetime, maybe you can slow down the human biological processes enough that you can get there over time. And maybe you could find a way to make cryonics work, or maybe you could do things that transhumanists are talking about, like uploading your memories and your personality to a cloud, and then once you get to your location, you just store the person's memories and personality on a computer drive, and then when it gets to the location, you download it into a new robotic body or new biological body that you've made for it. Or maybe you just send robots or biological robots to do what you want, and maybe if they're biological, maybe you grow them when the ship gets there. So there are all kinds of ways that you could get between star systems with slower than light and not be constrained by human biological lifespans or human psychology. So I don't think the distance objection works from either the Christian-oriented aliens or demons perspective, or from the skeptical aliens can't get here perspective.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily required faster than light travel. And, we just shouldn't be too quick to say what's impossible. I mean, like I remembered just now that I can't remember his name, but there was some physicist or some engineer who was talking about very confidently how, there could never be a nuclear bomb. Like it's impossible. It couldn't work. And then like the next day or something, the bomb was dropped on Japan.
And similarly, there were people who said you're never going to have heavier than air flight. And then the Wright brothers happened. And then there were people who said you're never going to be able to have trains that go faster than 40 miles an hour because people will suffocate. And okay, we got trains that go a lot faster than 40 miles an hour now. And if you think about what we could do, I mean, given our present state of knowledge, we can do a lot, but imagine what we could do in 10,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 years of further development. We can't really confidently say very many things are absolutely impossible.
Yeah. I mean, at most we can work out the implications of certain theories, but even then there are loopholes, like you're talking about with like general relativity. Like it's not all quite as cut and dried as it might seem at first glance. But shall we move on to the geography objection?
Okay.
Why are alien abductions and UFO sightings geographically concentrated in the U.S.? Doesn't that seem to indicate that they're best explained psychologically and culturally?
Okay. Why are the number of places from which nuclear weapons have been launched concentrated in the United States and a few other countries? Why don't we find them evenly distributed throughout the world? Well, it's because some people built them. Now, in terms of this objection, actually there's a danger of overestimating, because there are UFO sightings all over the world. We have a lot of them here in the United States, but we have a few unique things in the United States that could explain them. One of them, other than them just being a delusion, one of them is we've got a lot better communications technology here than in other places. If you go to Outer Mongolia, okay, these days maybe you could put it on Facebook, but historically that has not been the case. And whereas here in the developed world we have better communication reporting abilities, so this could be a reporting issue. But then there are other things. Maybe maybe the aliens are interested in the technologically advanced countries more because we're the ones with the nukes. And so there has been indications in the UFO reporting literature that UAPs are interested in our nuclear plants and in our nuclear weapons facilities. And nukes, even though they're kind of primitive from one point of view, they're very powerful. And I could easily see, say, if I'm an alien, saying, hey, there are these new kids on the block a few light years from here, and we've just seen nuclear explosions in their atmosphere. Do we want to wait until they get here before we start scoping this out? I can imagine, because once you've got nukes, you can do a lot of damage to somebody. And so I could see it being our release of nuclear weapons in 1945 being the thing that attracted alien attention. And they may have come here as a result, and they may be riveted on who's got the nukes and the other advanced tech that we might one day need to worry about. So even if it's true that there's more alien activity in the United States and the developed world than in other places, and that's not just a reporting artifact, I think that it's easily explainable by aliens are interested in the people who have the most tech.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I said I like this objection, because it's kind of like, it's issued like most of these objections very confidently, very definitely, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, first of all, they're not really geographically concentrated in the U.S., like by some metrics, but let's just stipulate that they are. Okay, well, that's not actually that weird, that they would be concentrated in the more technologically advanced countries. But, if you just think about it for a second, like, okay, you're in a relatively underdeveloped country and you see a UFO. Now what? Like, who do you tell? Whoever asks you? Like, where do you talk about? Like, how would that data ever be gathered? So, it is very plausibly a reporting artifact.
Yeah, and there's also another aspect to this, which is the critic on this point, even though it's a fair point to raise, the critic is actually not well informed about UFO literature and what UFO programs are happening in other countries, because there are lots of like South American UFO sightings, and the governments down there have had UFO study programs, and the same thing is true you have UFO reports in China and Russia, and you've got a lot of more UFO activity and reports elsewhere in the world than the critic is typically aware of, including programs to study them.
Yeah, I mean, where do you think this? Do you think it is just a reporting artifact that creates this perception on the part of skeptics? Because I've heard this from a lot of skeptics, where they're like, "Yeah, they're concentrated in the U.S. by like a lot."
Yeah, I think that there's sort of two reporting problems. The lower level reporting problem is how many sightings get put into a database that is in the local country. So like you're down traveling around, riding you're a caballero, you're riding your horse around the pampas grass in Argentina, down at Fin del Mundo, at the end of the world, as they call it, and you see a UFO. Do you get it reported? You're just a rural cowboy. Do you report it to an Argentinian database? Well, that's our first reporting issue. And locals in various places may not know how to report it and may not choose to report it. But then there's a second reporting problem, which is supposing it gets in the Argentinian database, does it then get communicated across the language barrier and become something that the critic here in America knows about? So that's our second reporting issue. And I think a lot of critics, they tend not to look at the data, actually. They tend to be frank, they tend to pontificate and not really examine the literature to see what's happening. Sometimes they proudly will even say, oh, I would never look at that stuff. Well, okay, then who's to blame for you not knowing about this? There's also another phenomenon, because I mentioned the language barrier. There's a joke in linguistics. Emerson, what do you call a person who speaks 3 languages?
Multilingual?
Trilingual, specifically. What do you call a person who speaks 2 languages?
Bilingual?
Bilingual, yes. And what do you call a person who speaks 1 language? Yes, that's right, an American. And so a lot of Americans, is because we've got this big self-sufficient country, we're not really that aware of the rest of the world. And a lot of American critics have never looked at the literature. I was like, why would I read a UFO book? And they're just aware of kind of the American bubble, and so they assume that things are disproportionate here when they've never actually looked into how common are they elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, skeptic. This is one of my hobby horses with the skeptic community, is that they, in my experience, rarely know what the beliefs are. Like, they know that people believe in UFOs, or, they think we might be visited by aliens or something, but they don't really know anything beyond that. They're not really aware of what people believe, and further, they're not aware of why they believe it. But anyway, I've just found that over and over again with the few topics, the small handful of topics that I know a lot about. When I go to the skeptical resources, I find more often than not, they are actually not reliable sources of information about what other people believe and why.
And that's true. I want to be fair to the skeptical literature, because the same thing is true to a significant extent of other people as well. Everybody knows their own tribe and understands their own tribe's belief, and that's usually why you want to go to primary sources to find out what people believe rather than listening to secondary sources, because if someone's talking about those other people over there and this is what they believe, the reliability level tends to drop off.
Yeah.
And so just with, say, the Christian atheist, tribes, atheists know what atheists believe, Christians know what Christians believe, but a lot of atheists don't really know what a lot of Christians believe. They tend to have caricatures, and a lot of Christians don't really know what atheists believe. They tend to have a lot of caricatures. So the same thing is true when it comes to the UFO community and other communities.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that it bothers me more with the skeptic community, because it's been pointed out to me before when I've said that kind of thing. Oh, well, isn't that more of a human problem than like a skeptic problem? And I'm like, yeah, to some extent, but most people don't present themselves as like the ultimate epistemic authorities.
Yeah,
like they are the rational adults in the room who have like figured out what's true and sorted through it all. I'm saying like that's why they bother me particularly.
And I have to say that's a fair criticism. I mean, I try to be as balanced as I can, but this is one where I have to say you're right. There is a disproportionate lack of awareness in the skeptical community because skeptics tend to be very confident of their own position to the point that they don't research other positions. To just give an illustration of that's outside the UFO field, there was a paper that came out just a few years ago dealing with parapsychology. And in the paper, the skeptics who wrote the paper, and there are open-minded skeptics that deal with parapsychology. These 2 authors were not. And they said, well, this is just all impossible, parapsychological phenomena like psychic functioning. It's just impossible. And therefore, we didn't even bother reading any parapsychological literature to see what the evidence is, because the evidence can't be right. Okay, that's not a scientific attitude. If that's a dogmatic attitude, and if people had taken that dogmatic attitude, say 1,000 years ago, we would not have the atomic theory of matter now, because the dominant viewpoint in science was the 4 classical elements. And atomism was viewed as this fringe, crazy idea. That's not how matter works. And if you just said, well, everybody knows that the laws of physics are there are only these 4 elements, or 5 if you want to count ether. We've only got these elements. Atoms don't exist. They're just a mathematical trick for keeping count of certain things. But they can't really exist because we know how matter works. Well, then you would lose out on the atomic theory of matter. And the scientific perspective is, even if you have a strongly held belief, whether that strongly held belief is there's only 4 or 5 elements, or whether that strongly held belief is psychic functioning doesn't exist, you always want to look at the data. And you don't say, because maybe your previously strongly held belief needs modification. And if you're not looking at the data, if you're just dismissing it and indignantly sometimes saying, of course I would never look at that, you're not acting as a scientist, you're acting as a dogmatician. And the same thing is true in the skeptical community when it comes to UFOs. Having said that, I think that because I always want to be fair, the same thing is true to a degree in the Christian community, because there will be Christians who say, "Oh, I know the Bible says this," but and now Christianity and evolution are not at each other's throats. Darwin himself was a Christian, and there are loads of Christians since who have no problem with evolution. I happen to be one of them. But there are Christians who think that they're incompatible, and those Christians also can be so confident of their beliefs that they're not willing to look at evidence. It's like, why should I look at genetic evidence for evolution? God's word says this, and that's good enough for me. His word is reliable. Science is not reliable. Therefore, I don't even need to look at genetic data regarding evolution. So you do have parallels, but I would agree with you that there is a tendency in many circles in the skeptical community to be overconfident of their views and not properly research them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one major area where I differ with them is that I think a lot of these things, like the topics you deal with on your podcast, that these things warrant investigation. Like we don't know ahead of time what the answer is or like how the world is going to turn out. Like even if you have a very high credence in something like the standard model or something, Sean Carroll kind of makes this, a priori is the wrong word to use exactly, but he doesn't bother looking into parapsychological or paranormal phenomena because he thinks that it's incompatible with, the core theory. And he's like, so I already know that it's wrong ahead of time. And some people have pointed out that his argument is actually, even if you accept that the core theory is like a pretty good description of the everyday world, the argument still doesn't really work. But, I just hate that kind of attitude that says, well, I've got a high credence in the core theory, or I have a perfect interpretation of the Bible or something, so I don't need to even investigate these things because I know ahead of time what the answer is going to be. I don't share that attitude.
Yeah, even if you did know in advance what the answer is going to be, and even if you're right about that, you could learn something in the process.
Moving along here to a very closely related objection. Geographic concentration. Why are alien abductions and UFO sightings temporally concentrated in the present day? Doesn't that seem to indicate that they are best explained psychologically or culturally?
Okay. I think there are several responses that a UFO believer could make here. The first one is, who says they are? They've been going on for thousands of years. Aliens even had a hand in designing us. We're partially artificial creatures due to guided evolution, with aliens messing with our gene line tens of thousands of years ago. Now, not all UFO believers believe that, but that is the ancient aliens hypothesis, and that ancient aliens had an impact on our development as a species. That is out there in the UFO community. So one option is they're not concentrated today. We may have a reporting artifact that makes it look that way because now we have many more records from the 20th century than any prior century. And so it may be a result of that. You could say, why are reports of the common cold clustered in the 20th century as opposed to 5,000 years ago? Well, 5,000 years ago, pretty sure the common cold existed, but we don't have a lot of records from 5,000 years ago. That was right after writing had been invented. Yeah. And they didn't tend to, if Pharaoh got a cold, they didn't tend to put that up on the walls in the temple at Karnak. Right. So they just weren't keeping records of this kind of thing back then that have survived. And so But one position is going to be that they're not concentrated today. They have been here all the way down through human history. Another, but suppose that's not the case. Suppose the UFO sightings are genuinely recent, and we shouldn't read UFOs back into every ancient source that describes something vaguely similar to them.
Right.
What if all the reports are recent? Have there been any things humans have done recently that might attract alien attention, like setting off nukes in our atmosphere? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So maybe the reason that the reports are clustered recently is because the aliens have only recently taken an interest in us because we've only recently become interesting. Mm-hmm. Whether they view us as a potential threat or competitor one day or whatever it is, as long as we were a bunch of primitive cave people, they might have had a mild curiosity about us, but not enough to mount an interstellar expedition. But once we start setting off nukes and developing space flight, they might consider us a little more worthy of investigation, and that's why we have more reports of this now.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, could you say something about some of those older reports, though? Like sometimes it's mentioned, like Ezekiel or other ancient sources. Like, it's one option is saying, well, look, they're not temporally concentrated in the present day. Mm-hmm. But, like you said, suppose they are. Well, there have been interesting technological advancements that might explain that. But, what are some of the some of the evidence that's cited that says like, oh, well, maybe ancient people thought about UFOs too?
Well, I have to say that I think the evidence is actually not good for the ancient aliens hypothesis. One of the reasons is when you start looking at the evidence that gets cited over and over again, it tends to be distorted in some way. For example, when people will cite the book of Ezekiel, and they'll note that Ezekiel describes a wheel within a wheel and say, oh, that's a UFO. It's like a flying saucer. Flying saucers look like wheels. Yeah, except that's not really what Ezekiel's talking about. One of the most plausible understandings is it's not a wheel inside of a wheel, which is, a little like concentric circles. It's a wheel intersecting a wheel, like the roller on the bottom of a chair. And in fact, if you look at the literary context, what Ezekiel is doing in this passage is he's describing God's throne. He's not describing a UFO. He's describing a chariot throne for God. And we actually know what chariot thrones look like because we've got bas-relief from other cultures that show kings and gods sitting on chariot thrones. And they don't look at all like UFOs. This is what Ezekiel is doing. And this passage in Ezekiel, or it's actually a couple of passages, gives rise to a major trend in Jewish mysticism in later centuries known as the Merkava tradition. This is the word for God's throne, which is also depicted as being a chariot. And so we actually know what Ezekiel's talking about. We even have pictures that archaeologists have uncovered of this kind of construct. It's like both a chariot and a throne. And so we know what's being talked about here, and it's not UFOs. So this is someone coming across the text who has a background in UFOs, but not a background in biblical literature or ancient Near Eastern archaeology, misunderstanding the text. Same thing happens with other people. You have, for example, there was a guy named Zecharia Sitchin who in the 1970s started proposing that there's what he called the 12th planet. He just means a planet beyond Pluto. And yes, Pluto is a planet because it's big enough to be round and it's not big enough to glow. And that means it's a planet.
Take that, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, that is the natural definition of it's big enough to be round, it's not big enough to glow, it's a planet. And yes, that includes our sister planet, the moon. Having said that, so Zecharia Sitchin billed himself as an expert in ancient Mesopotamian languages, and he claimed to have translated various ancient Sumerian and Babylonian texts that indicate there's this extra planet in our solar system on a highly elliptical orbit that takes like 12,000 years to swoop into the inner solar system. He called the planet Nibiru. He said it was inhabited by a race of people called the Anunnaki, and that they kind of came down to Earth and messed with our genome and wanted to turn us into gold slaves to dig gold for them and stuff like that. Okay, so Zecharia Sitchin claims this, and he's got a few illustrations from ancient Near Eastern archaeology and so forth, and some clay tablets. And here's the thing. He was a total fraud. He didn't speak any of these languages that he claimed to. He made up the translations, and he got a bunch of people who also were not speakers of these languages to believe him. Similarly, you look at Eric von Daniken, who kicked off the ancient astronauts craze in the 1970s with his book Chariots of the Gods. He would do things like go down and look at the Nazca lines and down in Peru, which are these shapes on the desert floor, and say, oh, these shapes can only be seen from the air, and that means they were built for aliens. And look at this here. This is probably a UFO landing strip. Okay, problem number one. Nova, the science documentary show, did an expose of Chariots of the Gods, and there was a book associated with it called Crash Go the Chariots. But I remember in the Nova documentary, they're showing you the picture from Zecharia Sitchin's book of his proposed alien landing strip among the Nazca lines. And then they show you a person walking down it, because this thing is 18 inches wide. Unless the aliens are tiny. This is not a UFO landing strip. This is something that is designed for some other purpose. Well, what might that be? Let's suppose for a moment it can only be seen by someone up in the air. Okay, if you're a primitive person and you want to, is there anyone you conceptualize as being up in the air that you might want to send a message to? Maybe a prayer or something. If you conceptualize some of your deities as being up in the air, and that's one of the three places deities tend to be conceptualized. You either have chthonic deities underground, you've got aquatic deities in the water, or you've got celestial deities up in the sky. And if you conceive of some of your deities as up in the sky, you might want to make things for them to look at to honor them and send messages to them like, we're in a desert, please send rain occasionally. And then the fact this is a valley. So you know what that means? There are mountains on both sides of it, and people up in the mountains can look down in the valley and see the patterns too. So the evidence that this has anything to do with aliens is extraordinarily tenuous at best. Yeah. And that tends to be true of all of the evidence that's cited for ancient aliens.
Interesting. So do you agree then that the sightings are kind of temporally concentrated in the present day?
I think they are. Now, I wouldn't say they're all necessarily from the 20th century. I would be open to that possibility, but I would want to hold open, because I haven't done a ton. I know there have been discussions of the possibility of extraterrestrial life in prior centuries, even prior to the 19th century. Yeah. I would want to go back and review the literature and see if we can find any credible accounts of actually meeting such individuals, but I would tend to agree personally that I think the sighting reports and abduction reports and so forth are tend to be recent.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a pair of episodes coming out. I want to say it's later in August. It might be in September. But I've got a pair of episodes coming out on the 1896, 1897 mystery airships. This was in the latter few months of 1896 and the first half of 1897. here in America, there were these reports of airships showing up that they were sometimes called mystery airships. They're sometimes called phantom airships or ghost airships. And a lot of people in the UFO community look back on them and say, oh, it was a wave of UFO sightings. And maybe that was the first time that aliens made contact. Yeah, well, okay, I look at the evidence and no. There is basically zero evidence that those would be considered UFOs. Those were regarded as being, by the people at the time, as these are just human inventors working on dirigibles. And they actually talked to the crews a bunch. And the crews said things like, yeah, I'm working with some inventors from New York and California, and we're testing our dirigibles right now. And so I think the mystery airships is a really interesting, fun story, but the evidence is it has nothing to do with UFOs.
I see. I was listening to this podcast called Philosophy on the Fringes, and they were talking about aliens and kind of ancient philosophy. Like, I guess ancient Greeks were talking about aliens, not about like seeing UFOs or meeting them, but just talking about life elsewhere in the universe. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. The one of the earliest, it's sometimes credited as the earliest science fiction story. It's called True History. Or depending on how you translate it, but it's like True History or A True Story. And it's great. You got these human sailors here on Earth, and they kind of use a water spout to get up to our sister planet, the moon, and they meet they meet these weird people on the moon, and they're having a war with the sun, and they get involved, and they get on these steeds that can fly through space, and they help out in the war, and I think there are giant spiders up there too, and on one of the planets, and I think they go to Venus. It's a lot of fun, but it's not reporting this as real. In fact, that's part of the joke. Is it's called A True History or A True Story when it's obviously made up.
So let's move on to the motivation objection.
Okay.
This one is more like and I think the people might be able to guess at least something that we're going to say about this one based on previous answers. But the objection goes something like, why would these, advanced aliens come all the way here just to do the things that it's often alleged they do, like abduct people or mutilate cattle or make crop circles? Yeah.
So, well, one of the things, there are several things to be said here. The first one is, what are they actually doing? It's understandable that they would want to study us, if we're a potential, either for just anthropological reasons, they might want to study us, and our planet. So just for purely scientific interest, they might want to do that. Or if they perceive us as a potential competitor or threat one day, they would also want to study us. And that could include more than just us. It could include other things like, let's study their crops and let's study their livestock, And it's possible that given that if they don't think like, and of course, let's study them too, biologically. So they might abduct humans, they might dissect cows, and they might mess with fields of crops. They might do all those things. And especially if they don't think like us, if their psychology is different, what they're doing might seem a little weird. So all those are possible. But are they really doing those things? Okay, so human abduction, I'm open to that happening. But I suspect it is really, if it happens at all, I suspect it's extremely exaggerated. And so I did for example, a pair of episodes on the Betty and Barney Hill encounter that kind of kicked off the abduction craze in the popular literature. It's not actually the first reported abduction, but it is the first one that became popular here in America. It occurred back in the 1960s, and to this couple from New Hampshire named Betty and Barney Hill. And then by the 1980s and 90s, you had all these abduction reports. Well, okay. how good is the evidence for the Betty and Barney Hill one? Because these days it's easy to say you've heard abduction stories, and so that's what's influencing what you perceived happened to you. Maybe, for example, you have sleep paralysis, which is a real thing. I've even had a few instances of sleep paralysis myself, where what happens is you wake up, but your body's motor control doesn't immediately turn on. And so you wake up and you feel paralyzed. And feeling paralyzed is not a fun thing. It's like you're trying to move and you can't. And people who are experiencing sleep paralysis frequently perceive a sinister presence. Now, in my case, when I've only had a handful of these, and it's been years since I had one, but when I had a sleep paralysis, I didn't think aliens, but I wondered, are there intruders in my home? Am I perceiving intruders down in the hallway leading to my bedroom?
Yeah.
And just human intruders. And but let's say you got someone who's read a lot of alien abduction accounts and they take them seriously, and then they wake up and they've got sleep paralysis. They might think, I can't move my body because the aliens are doing this. And so then they go to, they have this happen to them a few times. They think, I'm a serial abductee, but I can't really remember much about it. I should go get hypnotized. Well, the thing is about hypnosis, it is not a magic memory enhancer. Mm-hmm. It actually promotes confabulation. Because what you do is you relax and you're given permission to engage in a fantasy, and then often with leading questions by the hypnotist, and then you're told to regard this fantasy as an actual memory. But when you check out the information that comes out under hypnosis, it is not super accurate. It's anything but that. And this has been shown in a variety of contexts, including legal contexts, which is why hypnotic evidence is not admitted in court cases. Also, in the parapsychological community, you may have a lot of books which people have written saying, oh, I got regressed and hypnotized into this past life. Actual parapsychologists don't really use hypnotic evidence in reincarnation research because it doesn't turn up anything that's verifiable. And if it does, it's usually because someone read a book about the time period they're thinking they reincarnated from. So outside of the UFO community, hypnosis is not regarded as being a reliable tool for retrieving hidden memories. But in the UFO community it is. And so you have your sleep paralysis, you're wondering were aliens messing with you, you go get hypnotized, the hypnotist asks you questions about did aliens come to your room, and you visualize aliens come into your room and you think that's a memory. And so all of this current stuff, all these current alien abduction reports, I think are very easily influenced by the early ones, like the Betty and Barney Hill one. So what happened in Betty and Barney Hill's case? Well, they were driving back from a vacation in Canada. It was late at night. They saw a few strange things that actually do have natural explanations. Then when they get home, Betty starts having dreams about an alien abduction. They also had been watching a science fiction show called The Outer Limits that had an alien in it that looked like the ones they reported. Barney does not remember any of the things that are coming to Betty in her dreams. Well, okay, then they both go and they both get hypnotized, and lo and behold, they have this elaborate story about this alien abduction. And the hypnotist's conclusion was, well, they're sincere, but Barney's getting all this from Betty, and Betty's getting it from her dreams. And dreams also are not really that great as a memory booster of things that really happened. You probably don't want to rely on things that you had happen to you in dreams as something that happened in the real world. So I'm quite open to the hypothesis that the entire alien abduction phenomenon may not be real. It may all just be misunderstandings and hoaxes and confabulation and things like that. What about crop circles? Well, we know a bunch of them were hoaxed because you can even go on YouTube and watch crop circle hoax demonstrations. And and really the crop circle phenomenon is kind of an outgrowth of something that is better sourced in UFO literature. Back in the 60s and 70s, there would be occasional they're called trace cases, but J. Allen Hynek would classify them as close encounters of the second kind, which is where you see a UFO, you see it close enough that you can see some detail. He typically estimated this as like 500 feet or less, and it interacts with its environment in some way. So there were some UFO reports where they would, like, after the UFO took off, they would find grass that had been swirled or something like that, or squashed in a circular pattern. Okay, so that's interesting, and give consideration to that. Maybe those are real. But then in the 80s, these things started to become increasingly elaborate. And that's really what crop circles are. They didn't even call the early trace cases, they didn't call those crop circles. Those were sometimes called saucer nests, they were called trace cases, but they weren't these elaborate things we see today. So if you're talking about the elaborate things we see today, I think there's a good argument they're all hoaxes. What about cattle mutilation? Okay, cattle mutilation. Well, could aliens be doing it? Sure. Does it need to be aliens? Well, no.
Yeah.
Are there possible natural explanations that aren't exotic at all, like predation and disease and things like that? Well, maybe. Okay, maybe that's doing it. Cult activity has also been proposed. So has government testing. Because in the 1950s and so forth, we set off lots of nukes in the western part of the country in our atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And we've had other covert military research like nerve toxin testing and things like that. And there have even been cases where we've done covert things on humans as part of our experimenting, like the Tuskegee Airmen. And so if we've done covert, nasty experiments on humans, if our government has done that, would our government do that to some animals? Would they maybe release a, biological agent in some farmland and then go check the cattle that got it? Or would they release a nerve agent? Or would they be checking for fallout and seeing what's happened? So I think there are a number of possibilities. I mean, there are clearly dead cows. Mm-hmm. The question is, what causes the dead cows and the way they're found? Well, maybe it's just predation. Maybe it's humans who are doing it, including our own government, and I don't know, maybe it's aliens. But I tend to only resort to exotic explanations if the conventional explanations fail. Right. And thus far, to my mind, the conventional explanations on cattle mutilation have not failed. So I think with all three of those, cattle mutilations, crop circles, and alien abductions, all of them could have no involvement at all by aliens. So they might, even though there are reasons why aliens might come here and do stuff like that, especially if they don't think like we do, I don't know that they are coming here and doing that. They might be coming here and just flying around doing aerial surveys of us. So I don't think the motivation objection is a disproof of the idea that aliens are here and checking us out in some way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess just to try to steelman the objection further, okay, let's say we go along with what you're saying about those three examples I gave, but I feel like the skeptic at this point would just say, yeah, but why are they coming here and doing anything? Like, just fill in the blank with whatever you think they're doing. And
humans have bombs in space flight. Want to check that out before they get much further.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can imagine motivations, but like we've mentioned a few times, like a different kind of organism that evolved somewhere else is going to have, different psychological attributes. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, some of the things they do might be unrelatable, but yeah, even just granting, because I do agree with with everything you've said about this objection. But even just granting, like, okay, no, they are doing all that stuff. It's like, okay, well, still, I mean, I still don't quite get the force of the objection because, for one, scientists do all sorts of bizarre things all the time, and out of curiosity, which often includes studying humans and other organisms. And as a species, we've dedicated a lot of time and attention to that. And secondly, I don't even understand. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If you're a lizard in a rainforest out in South America and these scientists come and catch you and start studying you, it's like, what is this? Why are they doing this? Well, because we have this science got to study everything ideology. Maybe the aliens have some ideology that's like that and says they got to go study everything. And if it's alive, we want to got to go study it. That's our ideology. Or maybe they want to convert us. They're just waiting till we learn enough about them to give us their religious ideology or their economic ideology or whatever it is.
Yeah, you're just a wolf being tagged, and you're just like, what are you doing? It's like, I mean, the thing is, like, scientists, like, they engage in all kinds of activities that you wouldn't understand without knowledge of that specific subject. It's like walking into the middle of a conversation or something. So, like, for example, something that came to mind when I was reflecting on this, I remembered Sarah Palin kind of getting a lot of people mad at her because she said something about, like, oh, there's all this government waste, all this, like, senseless spending. And one example she gave, she was like, there are millions of dollars being allocated to studying fruit flies. Fruit flies, can you believe? Like, it's so stupid. And she's like, I kid you not, fruit flies. And, like, it was pointed out that these are absolutely critical to basic research in genetics. I just have a quote from Adam Rutherford to explain that. With only 4 chromosomes, but having a version of something like 75% of disease-causing human genes, the fruit fly is arguably on par with the mouse as the founding model organism for the field of genetics. End quote. So,
it's amazing that fruit flies only have 4 chromosomes.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're perfect for genetics research, and we can't just walk into the middle of a scientific research program and expect to know exactly what's going on. Like, I mean, the sentiment, I'm sorry, you're spending millions of dollars researching fruit flies. Like, that is a perfectly reasonable sentiment if you don't know anything about basic research in genetics. But for someone who does know, that's like a painfully stupid comment, So it's like, it's just never, this whole, like, motivation objection just never had any force for me. If they're at all, curious or or doing anything resembling science, then of course some of their behavior would seem very odd from our perspective.
It presupposes that you know their cognitive state, both in terms of information content and psychological principles, that they think like us and they have the same information that we do. But in fact, we don't know what their psychology is like or what information they have, and therefore we're not in a position to judge whether it's rational for them to want to come here and have some kind of contact with us.
Right. And, they're not monolithic, just like humans aren't. Like, there was, like, I just gave an example of one human who thought researching fruit flies was crazy, crazy waste of money. And then a bunch of other humans who thought that was a crazy thing to say. So, I mean, like, but...
or maybe they are monolithic. Maybe they're the Borg.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we couldn't really say much about alien psychology, I mean, like, their behavior might be unrelatable to us on a deeper level, and not just because we're walking into the middle of a scientific research project.
Now I have a little bit of sympathy with, and only a little bit, with the idea that we could figure certain things out based on concerning their psychology. One of the things, because there are certain evolutionary principles that are going to be true, that you can kind of deduce. Like, for example, if they're coming here, they're intelligent. They build craft. Okay, so what kind of organisms develop intelligence? Well, those that don't have other survival strategies. The organisms that tend to develop intelligence are those that use it as part of their survival strategy. And they tend to have certain characteristics. One of them is they have a very complex environment that they navigate, and for example, in the case of, and they usually are not herbivores. because as Larry Niven puts it in one of his science fiction novels, you don't need brains to sneak up on a blade of grass. But you do need brains if you're going to sneak up on the grass eaters. And so one of the things that more intelligent organisms here on Earth tend to either be carnivores or omnivores. So you look at humans, we're omnivores. That's also why we have front-facing eyes, whereas horses and cows have more side-facing eyes. Because if you're a horse, your survival strategy is built on running away from things. You don't have, even cows have horns, but horses, they can kick, but that's about it. Their real strategy is let's run away from sources of danger. And so horses need side-mounted eyes so they have vision that wraps around their bodies so that they can see sources of danger at a distance coming for them. Humans, being omnivores and thus meat eaters and thus hunters, need front-mounted eyes. This is why cats and wolves and big cats and dogs and humans and bears, we've got front-mounted eyes because we're going to hunt stuff. And that means we need vision where the data we're getting from our two eyes overlap so we can triangulate and use our stereoscopic vision to judge distances to how far that prey away is so we can attack it. And so I would expect that if intelligent aliens are coming here, they're most likely, they're probably going to be predators, whether they eat exclusively meat, whether they're obligate carnivores or omnivores. They're probably going to have a predatory evolutionary history just like we do. They're probably going to have front-mounted eyes or equivalent sensory organs that allow them to judge distances. And if they have a predatory background, they're going to be okay probably with the use of violence in some situations, and they're going to be sensitive to threats to their security. And so I think we can deduce some things about them, but we can't be too confident of the details of their psychology. If you compare, for example, humans and one of the most closely related species to us is chimps. Okay, we share a lot of evolutionary history in common, but despite Lancelot Lincoln, Bedtime for Bonzo, chimps are actually quite different from humans in psychology. So if you imagine the difference between us and a chimp psychologically, you can expect comparable or greater distances between us and an alien psychologically, even if they're as intelligent as us or more.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, even just looking at other primates that are like pretty closely related to us, that have like very different attributes and habits and customs and so on.
I have an idea for a science fiction story I may write someday where aliens basically have they're more advanced than us, but they're basically like chimps psychologically. So how chimps are hyper and they do the let's threaten the other people before we even interact with them to show that don't mess with us. So the first things aliens do when they make contact with us is they destroy Pluto. Just bang, planet killer. They smash a huge asteroid into it just to show us that they're strong and we shouldn't mess with them, and they're spastic like chimps are.
Wow, that sounds terrifying. A smart chimp is probably the scariest.
But this would be their form of slapping their chest and hooting. I'm not like anti-chimp. I'm not one of those people, but like I wouldn't want to be in the same room as one. I'd be very nervous the whole time. They're much stronger than we are.
Have you seen like a shaved chimp or like a hairless one? They're jacked. I mean, like there was one that I saw that had like some disease where he lost all his hair, and like they just look very strong.
They are, yeah.
Okay, so should we move on to the next one? So this is actually by the
way, out of curiosity, what number are we on right now?
We are on number 8.
Okay,
8 of 10. So
Oh, that sounds like a Borg designation.
This is, by my lights, probably the best objection. I don't know if you agree with that, but this is the Low Priors Objection.
Mm-hmm.
So, however unlikely it is that abductees, eyewitnesses, whistleblowers, and those are very different categories, but however unlikely it is that they're lying or that they're just mistaken, mundane explanations of their testimony are still more probable than the idea that we're being visited by aliens. So, in other words, the kind of evidence we have isn't sufficient to overcome the low prior probability of genuine alien visitations.
Well, I think that, I guess there are a number of things I could say here. The first one is that you got to look at the evidence in front of you. You cannot allow, priors are priors. Mm-hmm. They aren't conclusions. Because if you, I mean, this is kind of like David Hume's argument against miracles, which is frankly a terrible argument, that, you know, miracles by nature are improbable, therefore we should always assume there's a natural explanation for an event, and therefore miracles are impossible. Well, okay, by that logic, you would rule out any, not just miracles, but any improbable occurrence. You could say, okay, the odds of having identical twins is improbable, therefore we should always assume that any evidence presented for identical twins is to be explained in some other way, therefore identical twins are impossible. Or if that's not improbable enough for you, pick something else.
Yeah, but it seriously biases you towards only believing in things that happen with a sufficient
with frequency. High probability. Yeah. And so we're at risk with this low priors argument of not doing what you need with the evidence and taking it seriously and just sticking with your priors. So that's one possible problem here. Another possible problem is, how are you establishing your priors? Mm-hmm. You know, how do you know what the prior probability is of aliens meeting you? I don't think you can rationally establish that. You can say, well, they haven't made overt contact with us. Well, that's true, but no one's claiming they've made overt contact with us. You know, they haven't landed on the White House lawn, but that doesn't mean that you can dismiss evidence that they're present in some form. You know, like they've come here and they have some kind of covert research program or something that they're doing. So I think that I'm sympathetic to saying, well, my priors are low for this. That's the other thing. Priors are all subjective. They're from person to person. And if someone says, well, my priors are low and I haven't seen evidence that would overcome the low probability that my priors establish, well, I respect that. I want to know, well, have you looked at evidence and have you looked at it open-mindedly? But if they say, yeah, I've taken an open-minded look at the evidence and I'm just not convinced, I'd say, well, I respect that. I'm not convinced either that they're here. But I don't think we can draw firm conclusions from that. If you want to say, I haven't seen the evidence to convince me, that's totally fine. But if you want to say it's impossible aliens are here, or it's so improbable that I'm going to dismiss and scorn anyone who thinks otherwise, well, then I think you're being a jerk and you're not taking a genuinely scientific attitude towards this question.
Yeah. I mean, there is no agreed upon, like, objective way to set the prior probability for a hypothesis like this. So in a way, it's a good objection because we can't say definitely, like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like, you're setting your priors, incorrectly when you set them that low. And of course, that means we could do the same thing. We could say the same thing, but that's not really my point. Like, we could set them higher and they couldn't say we're doing it wrong. But my main point is that it's widely recognized that setting the priors, even though there's no agreed upon objective way to do it, it's still agreed upon that background knowledge has something to do with it. So if a hypothesis doesn't cohere well with other well-established knowledge, then that means the priors should be set lower than they otherwise would be. Then we would set the priors if it cohered nicely with background knowledge. But the problem is that the skeptic's case for setting the priors so low is dependent on exactly the kind of defeaters we've been talking about so far. Like the reason they set their priors so low, it's totally dependent on these kinds of objections, which I think we've been undercutting, this whole time. So I don't think their case for setting their priors so much lower than I'm setting them is really justified.
Yeah, I agree. They are setting priors based on the kinds of considerations we've been talking about and knocking down. That's not an argument that the priors should be set higher, but it is an argument to my mind that the priors and any conclusions that follow from them should be held tentatively. So if someone says, well, I just think it's going to be too hard for them to get here, that's fine. Just don't be dogmatic about it.
Yeah, like if someone said, well, look, I can't believe when there's some person testifying that they saw something, it is just really hard for me to accept that. And then they list off all of the objections that we've been discussing. It's like, if those objections worked, you'd have a great case for setting the priors so low that you just don't believe people when they say these kinds of things. But I just don't think that these objections, like these standard objections, I just don't think they're very good. Like, I don't think they're very compelling. So I just can't get behind. I'm like, look, I think you are setting your priors too low because the reasons you're citing are actually not the knockdown reasons that a lot of skeptics seem to think they are. So I mean, that's my main response to this low priors objection. I did want to touch on one more thing before we move on to the ninth objection. Which is just that there are confirmed cases of deception in the past. So, I mentioned briefly, like, oh, maybe they're lying or mistaken. So, it's not just like some vague possibility like, oh, people lie. Like there have been confirmed cases of like disinformation campaigns involving aliens. Oh yeah,
I've covered them on Mysterious World. I have I've covered several of them. I think Stephen Greer, who is a famous figure in some UFO circles right now, I think he's a total fraud. And I've got the video to prove it. He has actually hoaxed UFO encounters, where what he's really doing is dropping flares out of an airplane in the distance and pretending it's a UFO. There's another guy named Terry Lovelace who I've covered on the show, who I strongly suspect is making stuff up. There's a gentleman who was not making stuff up named Paul Benowitz, and I've covered him on the show. He lived by Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico and uncovered what he thought was evidence of alien infiltration at Kirtland and in the Kirtland area. And so he reported it to the Air Force, and the Air Force said, "You're right." And specifically, his contact was a man named Richard Doty, who was an Air Force intelligence officer and who is a lying liar who lies. So, and he ended up causing Paul Benowitz to have a nervous breakdown. And he even says he felt so bad afterwards, he confessed to Paul Benowitz that he had led him down this path, and Benowitz at that point refused to believe him. So why there are liars in all this.
Yeah. I mean, why did he lie to Benowitz, though?
The explanation he gives is, well, number one, he was ordered to. So Richard Doty, is not the bad guy. But the explanation is that, so Benowitz was an inventor. And he was into technology and gadgets, and he started pointing his gadgets at Kirtland Air Force Base and picked up on a classified project. And rather than tell him, and Benowitz thought what he was seeing was alien. And so rather than tell him, dude, we want you to back off because this is really a classified project, it's not aliens, they decided to mislead him and say, oh, yeah, you're right. This is very interesting. Let's stay in touch about this alien thing you've uncovered. But it was to prevent him and more dangerous people like the Soviets from learning about this classified project. And this was one of the things that was true of the UFO community during the Cold War, was it was penetrated by U.S. and Soviet intelligence. Because if you got these people who think aliens may be out there and they're going out and they're monitoring things in the sky, they're going to see covert aircraft testing. And the Soviets want to know about our covert aircraft, and our people want to keep track of what the Soviets might learn and from the UFO community about this. And so you had U.S. military personnel infiltrating the UFO community to keep track of what the UFO community knows, and thus what the UFO community could pass on to our nation-state competitors.
Yeah, I mean, I meant to mention this earlier with the hypnosis cases, that like there is, even if you are someone who's more convinced of genuine alien visitations than I am, there's just no avoiding that there's just a lot of nonsense in the UFO community.
There's a ton of it. Yeah.
A ton of it. And like, you don't have to be like a full-blown skeptic to recognize that, or to use some skeptical resources for some of the cases that come up. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to mention that first, but also just that, deception, like coordinated deception, intentional deception is a real thing that has happened, and that, UFO believers have fallen for, often through no fault of their own. Like they had good reason to believe what they were being told, but it was a lie.
Yeah, you have someone from you saw this alien thing, and you contact the Air Force Base and tell them about what you saw, and they send an agent over who says, you're absolutely right. You've got good reason to think he's telling the truth until you learn that what's really going on.
Yeah. So I heard you mention this, that the Majestic 12 documents are generally regarded as not
fake.
Okay.
Yes. Do we need to explain what those are, or?
Yeah, just briefly, and also why they're considered fake.
Yeah, so the Majestic 12 documents were a set of documents that purported to come from government and military sources, and they sketch this history about after Roswell, President Eisenhower or President Truman formed this group of 12 experts known as Majestic 12, also called MJ12, to oversee what we knew about UFOs, and that led to contact with extraterrestrials, and President Eisenhower signed a treaty with them and had a meeting with them in the 1950s, and we've been reverse engineering UFOs, and Roswell was an alien crash, and we've even had ETs sort of here on Earth in our custody, kind of, that we later returned, and all this stuff happened, and we're reverse engineering UFOs, and we've signed a treaty with them, so we've got off-world allies and stuff. And this was all coming out in the 1980s at the height of the Cold War. So we're because we did seriously, I mean, people think of 1962 as being the height of the Cold War, and that was a height, but also we almost went to nuclear war several times in the 1980s, such as after the 1983 Able Archer incident. And so we've got these really tense relations with Russia, and it's just so convenient that all of a sudden there are these documents coming out saying, oh, guess what? U.S. has alien tech and alien allies. They've got a treaty with them. Maybe Soviet leadership, you shouldn't mess with the Americans because they're going to go all alien on your butt. So that's a plausible motive for what the MJ12 documents were, but what actually convinced a lot of UFO researchers were the same things that convinced a lot of people that the Rosemary, what's her last name? The year 2000 President George W. Bush Air Force documents that got ended Dan Rather's career, that those were fake. Anachronisms. There were things in the MJ12 documents that were anachronisms. There were also stylometric studies that were done that indicated that even though these two documents are claiming to be from disparate sources based on stylometric qualities like length of sentences and the common grammatical features and word choice, this is really by the same guy. Even though it's claiming to be by two different guys. And, of course, these things were released anonymously through mail. People just got, film of them in the mail. And And so we don't have provenance on them. And it looks like Richard Doty, our friend from the Paul Benowitz case, was one of the people involved in this.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh. Does that mean that everything in those documents, like we can't trust any of it? I've just seen little snapshots of it, and I'm like, well, I mean, some stuff about like standard operating procedure if there's like a UFO crash. It's like, I mean, wouldn't they have one of those? Like, I mean,
that actually they do. And it's not in the MJ12 documents. We have it in other documents about what would happen if, because people have thought about this, and they've thought about other things like, what would happen if an alien probe showed up and said, "Hi, let's talk." I mean, there have been think tanks who have developed protocols for situations like that, and similarly, what people thought, well, okay, so what? Here we are. We're a team that's commissioned to deal with aircraft crashes. What if it's an off-world aircraft? What do we do? How do we handle that? And so, sure, yeah, policies like that have been developed independently of the MJ12 documents. Now, when it comes to the MJ12 documents themselves, they always say you want to plant a lie between two truths to make it more believable. So some of the information in the MJ12 documents may be accurate. I would suspect it's the less exotic stuff in them. But fundamentally, because we know a lot of what's in them is fake, I would say don't trust any of it unless you have independent confirmation from other sources that are better.
So next is the Illusion Objection. So the objection goes, many UFO sightings are produced by illusions. The eyewitnesses are just misjudging how far away the object is. And, why couldn't that explain all the sightings?
Well, because not all of them are in that category of something distant that you can easily misinterpret. J. Allen Hynek developed the famous close encounters categorization system of, first, second, and third kind. But that's only half of his classification system. In addition to the close encounters, there are the distant encounters. So the distant encounters are things like, there were three of them, daylight discs, so something you see in the day that's, but it's very small and distant, looks like a disc maybe. Nocturnal lights, so it's night and you see a light in the distance, it's moving kind of funny. And radar returns. And so these are distant encounters with something, and it's very easy for people to misinterpret things in a distance, but they're not all in a distance. That's why he developed the close encounters scale, where you can not only see something is there, but you can make it out in substantial detail. And so Hynek's first level of classification for the close encounters was, you see a UFO at a distance of, say, 500 feet or less so that you can make out detail about it. Close encounters of the second kind was not only do you see it, but it interacts with its environment in some way, like leaving landing gear traces on the ground, or being, frightening a dog or something like that. Then close encounters with the third kind is where you actually see apparent occupants of the craft. So even if you say, well, people have been mistaking the planet Venus, or they've been mistaking swamp gas, which is actually one that came from Hynek himself back when he was a debunker. He initially was a debunker, but then he came around and came to believe this is a real phenomenon. But he infamously proposed a particular sighting in Michigan, as I recall, was maybe swamp gas, and that he was widely mocked for that.
That was actually, I think it was near Dorr, Michigan, and I lived there for a short time.
Oh, cool.
I didn't learn about that till after the fact.
Was there much swamp gas near there?
Not that I noticed.
So anyway, he kind of regretted that line. But it's not all stuff that you can easily misinterpret. There were situations where people would see, oh, there's this glowing thing in the sky, and what it really was a spy plane that's flying high enough that even though the sun is set where you are, the sun is still shining where it is. It's reflecting off of it, and it looks like it's glowing. But that's a distant encounter. That's not one of the close ones. And so there are illusions that would, trick people, like this glowing spy plane illusion, but they just don't all fit into that category. There are other credible sightings, including now ones that we've gotten gun camera footage of. I mean, it's kind of sucky gun camera footage because it's not the classified good stuff. They're not going to let the Russians know how good our actual high-res cameras are on our planes, and what they can really detect. But we've got some declassified footage of stuff that is not easily explained. There are people who've tried to produce explanations and have claimed things about it, but you go back to the eyewitnesses and they say, no, that wouldn't work for this reason and this reason and this reason. And other experts who've examined the footage saying, no, that explanation, this is not a flying turkey, or whatever. And it doesn't look like one. And in the footage, even in the bad declassified footage. So I think that while there are illusions that trick people or people misperceive, that does not explain all of the data.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it can explain some sightings, but it's just like if you were familiar with a range of UFO stories and even videos, it's like I just don't think you would say this. Like, skeptics seem to get a lot of mileage out of just not knowing anything about the subjects they're skeptical of, but
frequently, unfortunately, yes.
Like two cases that came to mind. First of all, like I saw some video that a skeptical friend shared of some people who were set up in the desert for some reason with like tents and a camera crew, and then like a fly buzzed across their camera, and they were like, "Wow, a UFO!" like right away, and like I don't know what their issue was, but like it was so evidently a fly. Anyway, so they're showing this video like, oh, doesn't this prove that they're all morons? And it's like, well, no, I mean, like that couldn't explain every case. Like,
that's one of the things I do on Mysterious World is when I make the list of, so here are the likely possible explanations, and we go through them, I frequently will say, well, I'm sure this explains some of the cases. But it's not a good general explanation for all of the cases because there's other data that doesn't fit this one, and depending on the particular mystery we're looking at, I may find multiple ones and say, okay, yeah, I think these first three alternatives they're all contributing causes to this, and none of them are exotic, but they're not good general explanations because there's still a bunch of cases that don't fit any of these patterns.
Yeah. Like two that came to mind when I first came across this objection. First off was it was a story that you covered on Mysterious World about a woman who she was in the, and I'm forgetting her name and the name of the woods, but I'm sure you know it, she's in the woods in Texas, and there was this bright blinding light. She was with, it was like two older women and a young boy.
This is the Cash Landrum UFO encounter.
Yeah.
Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum.
That's right. Okay, yeah. So I mean, like, when you think about their encounter, it's like, oh, well, maybe they were misjudging the distance. It's like, that just doesn't even begin to apply to like the specific case.
No. Because their car got so hot. They were so close to the object and it was emitting flame. Their car got so hot that, like, Vicky Landrum puts her hand on the dash in the car and it leaves a handprint, and Betty Cash has to open the car door handle using the sleeve of her leather jacket because she burned her hand on it, and then all three of them get symptoms of acute radiation syndrome.
Yeah, that perfectly correlate with how long they were outside the car.
Right.
It's like, oh, maybe they just misjudged how far away it was. It's like, you have to look at the case. Like, it has nothing to do with that. Or another one that came to mind was like the David Fravor stuff, where it seems like you have multiple witnesses. Like, some are on the ground, some are in the air, some are looking at screens, like, instruments, and some are looking at it. And it's like they're all reporting the same thing. It could not it just doesn't seem like a very plausible explanation when you have multiple witnesses who are looking at it with different instruments.
Well, especially because David Fravor was the lead pilot in a group of planes, and so they have footage of this is from the Tic Tac incident from 2004 off the coast of San Diego. You've got different planes at different locations in the air. You can use triangulation to figure out how far away it is.
Yeah. I mean, not to repeat myself, but it seems like skeptics do get a lot of mileage out of not knowing much about the subject they're skeptical of. But we've already granted that, like, yeah, there are certain sightings that could be explained this way. It's just it doesn't apply to all of them, and Anyway, should we move on to the final objection here?
Yeah, sure. Let's deal with the big bad.
Yeah, this is we saved the worst for last, so it's almost barely worth mentioning. But I've heard it enough times that it maybe be a good idea to address some of the armchair psychologizing that goes on about like UFO phenomena. So this is just the psychoanalysis objection.
Okay.
So this is really the belief in UFOs and aliens. It's just a modern manifestation of the religious impulse. And then some people go into varying levels of detail here, noting parallels between belief in aliens and, theistic belief or something like that.
Okay, well, so I need some data to work with. What do you see as the most plausible arguments in favor of this hypothesis?
Well, I guess they note that that belief in this kind of thing, arises at the same time that religion seems to be declining, at least in like relative terms.
Okay.
So like in the West, you have a lot of. So I mean, again, this almost involves presuppositions that we've already talked about. Like, well, given that it's geographically concentrated in the U.S. and temporally concentrated in the present day, then they say, well, this arose at the same time religion was declining in the West. And then they note their little similarities, and then they're like, oh, this is like a debunking explanation. This is why people believe in this kind of thing, which, I mean, one obvious reply is like, you're pretty knowledgeable about this subject, and you're religious. It's not like the alien UFO stuff is just religion for atheists. It's like, oh, the only people who take this seriously are atheists and agnostics. It's like, no, there are plenty of religious people who don't dismiss it and say it's all demons.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's tough because this is very slippery. Like when we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, it's like it's hard to even steelman this objection because it is just kind of this slippery psychoanalysis,
Yeah. So in terms of this one, I'd say a few things. The first one is we're in severe jeopardy of post hoc ergo propter hoc. Even if it's true that that belief in alien appearances happened after decline of religion in various parts of the world, that does not establish a causal relationship here. And so you're in severe jeopardy of the post hoc ergo propter hoc foundation. You cannot say, I got a college degree and then I got in a car accident, therefore college degrees cause car accidents. Similarly, in this case, even if it's true, well, that alien visitation reports arose after a decline of religion, that doesn't establish any kind of correlation between the two. You can similarly say, well, I've already given an example, but this is just a fallacy unless you can go further and establish some kind of causal connection. So how might we do that? Well, one way of attempting to do that would be to look at other areas and say, do non-religious areas have higher proportions of belief in UFOs? Doesn't really look like it. You got a high percentage of belief in UFOs actually all over the world, in both religious and non-religious places. Another one is, what's the theory behind this? Why would somebody want to believe? What is belief in UFOs fulfilling for people that religion otherwise would fulfill? Well, okay, the two things that religion deals with are the divine and the afterlife. And the divine, usually in the divine, at least in religions historically, you've been getting help from the divine, and like in this life, and then you entrust yourself to the divine for the afterlife. And so do people believe that aliens are helping them in their lives? Well, maybe a few people believe that, but not so many. Mm-hmm. And are people entrusting themselves to the aliens in the afterlife? Well, maybe a few people, but probably even less. So it doesn't look like that this is plausibly fulfilling the same functions that religious people have. Then you also mentioned there are religious people who believe in these, and then if you look at how are you correlating the sudden onset of belief about extraterrestrials, which, I mean, you had speculation about them before, but the UFO craze launched in the summer of 1947. And it's not like there was a dramatic decline in religion right before the summer of 1947. In fact, there was a big boost in religion because we had just come through World War II, and you had, people all over the planet praying for victory and stuff like that. And they thought, the religious ones thought God came through and the good guys won and the Nazis didn't win. And they're not attributing that fact to aliens. They're attributing that to God. And you have this the 1950s are not generally regarded as the nadir of religion in the United States. It's actually, that's back when everybody went to church. Right. So there are multiple aspects of this that just make it sound like armchair psychologizing that has not in any way been rigorously tested and does not appear to be a good fit for the actual data.
Yeah. If you're going to engage in psychoanalysis, at least do it well.
Yeah.
At least be good at it.
And this is something else. I am very hesitant. I get calls. I do one of the shows I do is called Catholic Answers Live. People call in; they can ask me any question they want, pretty much. And I regularly get questions about why do these people believe this thing. Mm-hmm. And I get the sense that a lot of times what they want to know is what's the psychological reason for this. And I never want to go there. I mean, I occasionally may tentatively offer some thoughts about what psychological reasons could contribute to it, but I'm very hesitant to do even that. I do not want to psychologize other people and explain their beliefs psychologically. I want to say, what's the evidence for them? And the overwhelming in part because I want my beliefs respected, instead of saying, oh, you believe this because you've got this psychological characteristic. No, thank you. Let's talk about the evidence I have for my beliefs. And I want to do other people the same courtesy. So what I tend to do is I say, well, they believe this because they think they have this evidence, and we can talk about that evidence and see if it's good or not. But it's generally a weak move to attribute someone else's beliefs to psychological causes. What that generally tells me is you don't have a good grasp of the evidence and you don't think you can take down their belief based on the evidence. That's why you're resorting to psychology, because it doesn't require you to do any research and it doesn't require you to do any hard thinking and argumentation. You're just sloppily attributing their beliefs to something non-evidential rather than actually engaging the evidence and dealing with that. It's lazy apologetics.
Yeah. I mean, there was one podcast I listened to, which I otherwise like, where the guest they had just dismissed the entire UFO phenomenon within 10 seconds and immediately and jumped straight to, this is just a religious phenomenon in a secular guise. Like within 10 seconds. It was basically the dynamic that you described where it's like they could not have won any argument with anybody about like this kind of thing. So they're just like, well, I mean, it's obviously ridiculous to think, you might think that creatures like us might have evolved like we did and just been around longer, and advanced and traveled through space. But that's obviously ridiculous. So we have to immediately resort to psychoanalysis. But yeah, it is lazy. And it's also, it's just frustratingly vague, I guess. Like I found an article on Vox.
It's also runs the risk of being unfalsifiable.
It's purely
unfalsifiable. If it's unfalsifiable, okay, then this may be your belief, but it's not a scientific belief because you can't falsify it.
Yeah. I mean, like Vox ran this long interview with someone who wrote a whole book. I don't know. I guess the whole book is like this, but the interview was just like excruciating. But yeah, it was just an interview about this exact kind of thing of like, oh, this is like a secular religion or something. But yeah, I mean, it's just lazy apologetics, like you said. Yeah,
psychologizing other people instead of engaging their position and saying, so what evidence do you have for this? Why do you think this? It is very infuriating to me. And especially when people are critiquing other people who aren't present and they're not getting their own input and their own say for, no, actually, this is why I believe this. It's ungentlemanly and disrespectful to my mind. It's kind of like there's an apocryphal story, I'm sure, about the British legal system. So in Great Britain, here in America, we have attorneys or lawyers, but there they split the role in two. So you have solicitors and barristers, and one of them is supposed to prepare the case and work with the client, and the other presents it in court. And there's a famous, no doubt apocryphal story about, the guy who's going to present it in court. He's got his client there. He hasn't done his own research. He picks up the case and it says, there is no case, abuse the opponent. And that's essentially what this is. You're not engaging the case. You're just abusing your opponent.
I mean, just returning to the Low Priors Objection, my main argument, I guess, for being open-minded about this kind of thing is not just that, the universe is going to turn out stranger than we probably think it will, even though I think it will turn out stranger than most people think it will. It's really just that, the defeaters that are commonly offered are just not that good. And people are coming into this just with their priors set way too low. So when they hear some testimony about alien activity or just like UFOs or whatever, it's like, I think some people just, there's nothing you could say to convince them, but they're not necessarily being irrational. They think they have very good reasons to always go with the more mundane explanations. And what I'm saying, what I think that, you've done here today is undercut most of those pretty effectively, so that you can't really justify setting your priors as low as you were. Especially if you were coming into this thinking that all those were really great objections. And then, I think after hearing, you have to update, you have to update based on what you just heard from the opposing side. And it's like, okay, maybe you have been setting your priors too low, and maybe that's why you're considering this to be so ridiculous. So that's my little spiel.
Yeah, I would agree. And like I said, I'm not convinced that UFOs are real. I mean, in terms of extraterrestrial or other exotic origin. Yeah. I'm not convinced of that, but I am open to it because I recognize these defeaters don't defeat.
Yeah.
And so I've got to be open to it. And there is some anomalous evidence, like the videos that got released from the Defense Department that are not easily explained. And they're not the only such evidence we have. There are cases that are credible and not easily explainable. So I think the rational position on this is open-minded, but open-minded but skeptical in the sense of using critical thinking, as opposed to skeptical in the sense of not open-minded.
Yeah, dogmatic, incurious.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that applies to a lot of skeptics, just criminally incurious dogmatists. Maybe I think it applies to more of them than you do, but
it just feels so good when you know you're right and everybody else is stupid. And and so, you know, it takes some effort to say, hey, maybe other people have a point. Maybe I'm not the only one who's got a monopoly on truth here, and I need to actually take seriously positions that I haven't taken seriously before.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I'm with you. I mean, I'm basically agnostic on this. I'm open-minded. Yeah, so I mean, is there anything else that you want to touch on before we sign off here?
No, not really. I guess I should mention for people, since we've mentioned Mysterious World a few times in the show, I should let people know how they can locate it. So it's in Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher and all the standard ones. So you can just look it up in your podcast app, whatever that happens to be. You can also check out the video version of it, because we do a video version of it, and we have video editors who, you know, add elements into it visually to help bring points across more clearly. You can check that out at my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, Jimmy Akin as in Nancy. And while you're there, do all the YouTube things, you know, like, subscribe, hit the bell notifications, and comment and all that stuff. And I appreciate it, because I am trying to grow my channel, and everybody's welcome as I try to encourage a good discussion of the issues we talk about. I never expect everybody to agree with me on everything, and I regularly get messages that you know, express other viewpoints and want to challenge things I've said, and as long as they're respectful, I'll respond back to them. You know, I have feedback episodes that are bonus episodes that don't come out on Fridays, where I interact with what people have written in, including alternatives that people have proposed or criticisms people have made of a position I've taken, and that's all totally fine. I enjoy the free flow of ideas and that discussion. Also, you can go to the homepage of the podcast, which can be found at mysterious.fm. So FM like in FM radio. Unfortunately, it's not .com, because that one is not available. But mysterious.fm was available, so you can go there.
All right. Well, Jimmy Akin, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your time, and you know, it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, I've had a great time. Thank you so much for the invitation.